I always thought silence was peaceful, until it became the loudest thing in my marriage. The house felt too quiet again that evening, the kind of quiet that made every small sound feel like an accusation. My husband had left for a 3-day trip that morning, barely giving me more than a distracted kiss on the forehead before rushing out. I didn't expect anything more anymore. The routine had become predictable. He came and went like a guest, leaving behind empty spaces where conversations should have been. His friend Daniel had come to stay for a few days due to renovations at his apartment. He wasn't the type to intrude. If anything, he tried too hard to go unnoticed. But even his presence couldn't drown out the heaviness in the walls. I kept telling myself I was fine, that the quiet was fine, that I didn't need anyone to ask how I felt. But the truth had been building in my chest for months, maybe years, and that night it cracked after cleaning up the kitchen. I went to the bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at nothing. It wasn't sadness exactly. It was more like exhaustion with nowhere to rest. I pressed my palms to my face and tried to breathe deeply, but the pressure in my chest only got tighter. I thought maybe letting myself cry would help, but even the tears felt stuck. It was humiliating how hard it was to simply fall apart when no one was around to see. The house wasn't old, but the bedroom lock had always been unreliable. I'd complained about it plenty of times, but my husband never had time to fix it. I closed the door anyway, more out of habit than expectation, and buried my face in my hands. I wasn't doing anything dramatic, just trying to let out the frustration I'd been swallowing for so long. I didn't hear footsteps. I didn't hear the doorknob turning. I didn't hear the soft push as the door swung inward. All I heard was my name, quiet, surprised, apologetic all at once that I jerked my head up so fast I felt my neck strain. Daniel stood frozen in the doorway, eyes widening as he realized he had walked in on something he definitely wasn't meant to see. Not something scandalous, not something shameful, but something far too raw. My shoulders were shaking, my eyes red, my breath uneven. I must have looked completely undone. Sorry. I thought. He stopped himself, lowering his gaze immediately and stepping back. The door wasn't locked. I didn't mean to. I heard something and I thought maybe you needed. His words tangled before he could finish. I scrambled to wipe my face, trying to look composed, but the damage was done. There was no hiding anything now. Not the loneliness, not the exhaustion, not the years of feeling unseen. It's fine, I managed, even though nothing about the situation felt fine. My voice cracked, betraying me completely. He hesitated at the doorway, torn between leaving and making sure I wasn't about to collapse again. His expression wasn't pity, something about that made it worse. It was concern. Genuine, soft, careful concern. The kind I hadn't felt in so long that it almost hurt. I'll leave you alone, he said, but he didn't move yet. Just, are you okay? A simple question. One my husband hadn't asked in months. One I didn't realize I needed so badly until it was offered by someone who was technically a stranger in my home, but I swallowed hard. I'm okay. I lied. He nodded slowly, like he didn't believe me but didn't want to press. He stepped back and gently pulled the door closed. But the moment it clicked shut, the silence felt heavier than before. My pulse was still racing, not because he had seen anything compromising, but because he had seen something real. Something I'd kept hidden even from myself. For the rest of the night, I avoided leaving the bedroom. I didn't want to cross paths with him again. Not while my face was still warm and my eyes still swollen. I hated that he had witnessed me on the edge like that, hated how vulnerable I had been. At the same time, I couldn't get his expression out of my head. He didn't look disgusted, or awkward, or uncomfortable. He looked worried. A type of worry that came from noticing someone long before they realized they needed noticing. The thoughts spiraled until I felt dizzy. I kept replaying the moment in my mind. The door opening, the instant shock in his eyes, the way he turned away so quickly as if protecting my dignity mattered more than understanding what was happening. That small gesture, turning away, stayed with me. It felt like something no one had done for me in a long time. Respecting my vulnerability instead of ignoring it, I lay awake for hours. Maybe it was embarrassment. Maybe it was anger. At myself, at my husband, at the emptiness between us that had become so normal. Or maybe it was something else entirely, something more dangerous. The feeling of being seen, even for a split second. When morning finally came, sunlight spilled through the curtains like it was mocking me. I forced myself out of bed, washed my face until the redness faded, and tried to compose myself before going downstairs. I rehearsed normal greetings, practiced a steady tone, willed myself to appear unaffected. But the moment I stepped into the kitchen and saw Daniel standing by the counter, everything inside me tightened again. He glanced up, and for a second, the silence between us spoke louder than anything we could say. He didn't bring up last night. He didn't ask questions. He didn't even look at me too long. But something in the way he set a second mug of coffee on the counter, exactly how I liked it, told me he hadn't forgotten a thing. That small silent gesture stirred something deep in my chest, something I wasn't ready to name yet. Something that scared me because it felt like the first sign of a crack forming in a wall I thought would always stay solid. And for the first time in a very long time, I wondered what might happen if someone else noticed the cracks before the person who was supposed to. The awkwardness I expected the next morning didn't happen. Not the way I'd imagined it. I thought Daniel would avoid me, keep his distance, act like a guest who wanted nothing more than to disappear into the walls. Instead, he behaved as though nothing unusual had happened at all, and somehow that made everything more complicated. He slid the mug of coffee toward me without a word, then continued scrolling through something on his phone. The casualness of the gesture disarmed me. It felt too normal for what had happened the night before. I murmured a quiet thank you, trying to focus on anything except the fact that I had fallen apart barely 10 feet from where he now stood. The silence wasn't uncomfortable, at least not from his side. It was me. I felt hyper-aware of every movement I made. The way I held the cup, the way I breathed, the way my eyes kept flicking toward him even when I tried to stop. It wasn't attraction, not yet. It was something subtler, something unfamiliar. Awareness. He existed now in a space of my mind I hadn't allowed anyone to occupy in years. My husband had called earlier that morning. The conversation lasted maybe a minute. He asked if I had remembered to pay a bill. He didn't ask how I slept. He didn't ask how I was. When I told him about the faulty lock incident, just the lock, not the rest, he brushed it off like it was my fault for not reminding him again to fix it. When the call ended, I felt the same hollow thud in my chest I always felt after talking to him. Daniel must have noticed the shift in my face because he paused and looked up. Everything okay? I was tired of the question. Or maybe I was tired of lying. Still I nodded. Just a long night. He didn't push, didn't pry, didn't use that tone people use when they're fishing for details. Instead, he set his phone down and leaned slightly against the counter. Arms crossed, eyes steady. There was something quiet in the way he watched me. Observant but not invasive. Like he knew I was balancing on a thin edge and wanted to steady me without touching me. You know, he said slowly, you don't have to pretend everything's fine just because I'm here. The words were gentle, but they hit hard. I felt my breath catch just a little. I'm not pretending, I said. It came out too fast, too defensive. He tilted his head a fraction of an inch, not buying it. But he let it go. That was the worst part, how easily he let me guard myself. How he didn't force me to unravel. How he simply made space, and somehow that made the urge to fill it even stronger. He finished his coffee and offered to help with a few things around the house. I tried to decline, telling him he wasn't obligated to do anything. He gave a half smile. I know I'm not obligated. That's why it's easy to offer. I didn't have a response to that. We ended up working on minor household repairs, things my husband had been promising to fix for months. Daniel didn't ask questions about why they were neglected. He didn't make comments or judgments. He simply got to work while I handed him tools, sometimes talking, sometimes working in silence. It was terrifying how natural it felt. At one point, he was adjusting a shelf and asked me to hold it steady. As he worked, his hand brushed mine, barely accidentally, but the contact lingered in the air far longer than it did on the skin. I didn't pull away and he didn't apologize. He simply continued, the proximity charged but controlled. When the shelf was fixed, he stepped back. Our eyes met by accident, or maybe not. It was hard to tell. That look lasted only a second, but it carried the weight of everything unspoken since the moment he opened that bedroom door the night before. A flicker of something neither of us intended to acknowledge. I cleared my throat and stepped away first, pretending to busy myself with something in a drawer. My heart was beating too fast, and I hated that I wasn't in control of it. The rest of the morning went quietly. He worked, I cleaned. But the memory of the look kept replaying in my mind. How steady his eyes were, how unafraid he seemed of whatever he thought he saw in me. It had been years since someone had looked at me without indifference or impatience, and it left a mark I didn't know how to erase. Around midday, he asked, "Do you want to talk about last night?" I froze. "Not the part you're worried about," he added quickly, his voice softer. "I mean the part where you were upset." My stomach tightened. I didn't want to open that door for him. I didn't want him to see how deeply the cracks ran. But there was something in his tone, not curiosity but concern, that made refusing feel like a lie to myself. "I wasn't upset," I said, but my voice betrayed me again. He gave a small, almost sympathetic sigh. "You were. And that's okay." "How do you know?" I asked before I could stop myself. He met my gaze directly. "Because people don't break like that unless they've been holding too much for too long." The words hit deeper than I expected. I felt something inside me loosen. Dangerously, I sat down at the dining table because my legs felt unsteady. He didn't sit across from me. He sat at a respectful distance on the side, angled toward me but not imposing. The positioning told me everything. He wasn't trying to get closer, but he wasn't about to walk away either. After a long moment, I whispered, I felt overwhelmed. It wasn't the full truth, but it was a start. He nodded, encouraging but patient. Overwhelmed happens to everyone. What matters is that you don't face it alone. "I'm used to facing everything alone," I said without thinking. His jaw tightened a little at that, but his eyes softened. "You shouldn't have to be." I looked away quickly. His kindness felt like a spotlight, revealing things I tried to keep buried. My marriage wasn't abusive. It wasn't dramatic. It was worse, it was empty. Empty in ways that made nights like the last one feel inevitable. I didn't tell him any of that, but I think he saw it anyway. The rest of the afternoon passed slowly, charged with a quiet tension neither of us named. Every small moment felt heavier than it should have. The way he handed me a towel. The way he said my name. The way I kept noticing the details of his voice, his gestures, his patience. It wasn't desire, not yet. It was something more dangerous. The sense that someone was finally paying attention. By evening, I thought things had leveled out, until he spoke again as he passed me in the hallway. "If you ever need to talk or just breathe, I'm here." He said it so simply, like it was the most ordinary thing in the world. But it wasn't. It was the kind of sentence that stayed in the air long after he walked away. And it stayed with me longer than it should have, longer than I wanted it to, because it had been a long, long time since someone offered me comfort without expecting anything in return. The day my husband canceled our plans was the day everything inside me shifted. It happened with the same casual coldness he always used, as if even his disappointments were automated. He called late in the afternoon, his voice clipped and distracted, telling me he had to extend his trip. No apology. No acknowledgement. Just instructions: what bills to check, what package to expect, what he needed me to handle. When the call ended, something in me simply folded. I stood in the living room staring at the blank TV screen, feeling an ache I couldn't swallow this time. I had spent the whole day grounding myself, telling myself I was fine, telling myself last night's breakdown meant nothing, telling myself Daniel's concern didn't matter. But the moment I hung up the phone, all that effort vanished. The loneliness came back full force. Sharp, heavy, undeniable. I sank onto the couch and pressed my face into my hands. This time the tears didn't resist. They came quickly, hot and frustrated, spilling out before I could think. I wasn't crying because of my husband's cancellation. I was crying because I'd finally hit the point where even pretending didn't work anymore. I didn't hear footsteps. I didn't hear the shift of weight. I just felt the atmosphere change, like someone had walked into the gravity of my collapse. When I lifted my head, Daniel was standing at the edge of the room. He didn't ask what happened. He didn't stare. He didn't do anything dramatic. He just moved slowly, deliberately, like someone approaching an injured animal, careful not to startle it. "Hey," he said softly. "Breathe for a second." That was all it took for me to fall apart again. I wrapped my arms around myself, trying to hold the pieces together. He came closer but stopped a few feet away, giving me space to choose what I wanted. That distance, respectful, controlled, made my chest tighten even more. I laughed weakly between breaths. "Sorry. I didn't mean to. I don't even know what's wrong with me." "You're human," he said. "That's what's wrong with you." The simplicity of the answer broke me further. The tears kept coming. I wiped at them angrily, embarrassed. He lowered himself onto the floor near the coffee table, sitting where I could see him without feeling trapped. He didn't touch me. He didn't lean in. But the nearness was enough to steady my breathing a little. After a stretch of silence, he spoke quietly. "Was it your husband?" I closed my eyes and nodded. "What happened?" He canceled. Again. My voice trembled. And I shouldn't care. I should be used to it. But it just hit wrong today. His expression shifted in a way I couldn't completely read. Not anger, not judgment, just a deep understanding I wasn't prepared for. "It's not about the plans," he said gently. "It's about feeling like you don't matter." My breath caught. No one had ever put it into words that cleanly. "I feel invisible," I whispered. "All the time. I don't even know when it started." He exhaled slowly, like he'd been holding the same truth in his own lungs. "You're not invisible." The room felt too quiet after that. Too exposed. For a moment I didn't look at him. I couldn't. But when I finally lifted my gaze, he was watching me with an intensity that wasn't invasive, just honest. The kind of honesty that strips away every shield you've ever built. "I shouldn't be saying any of this," I murmured. "Why not?" "Because it isn't your place." He shook his head slightly. "Maybe. But someone should have noticed before now." The words hit harder than he probably intended. A silent weight formed in the space between us. Heavy, fragile, charged. I felt my heartbeat pick up, felt a warmth rise under my skin that had nothing to do with embarrassment. The air shifted again, subtle but unmistakable. He reached up, hesitated, then stopped. His hand hovered near my face, as if he wanted to wipe a tear but wasn't sure if he had the right. The hesitation was worse than contact. It sent a ripple through me, something sharp and confusing. I didn't move. I didn't give permission. But I didn't pull away. His fingers brushed just barely against the corner of my eye, wiping a tear I couldn't catch in time. It wasn't intimate. It wasn't inappropriate. It was gentle, careful, almost reverent. But the effect was instant. I felt my breath stutter, felt heat spread across my chest, felt every emotion I'd been suppressing climb up my throat. When our eyes met again, the tension was no longer something imagined. It was real. It pulsed between us like a second heartbeat. He froze, realizing the moment had gone further than either of us intended. He lowered his hand immediately and sat back a little, caught between wanting to comfort me and wanting to protect me. From himself, from me, from the consequences waiting behind whatever this feeling was turning into. "I shouldn't have done that," he said quietly. "I didn't stop you," I whispered. That was the moment everything could have tipped too far. I felt it. He felt it. The air was thick with something neither of us could name without breaking every rule around us. He looked torn, conflicted in a way I had never seen him before. He ran a hand through his hair and exhaled. "We need to be careful." "I know. Because if we're not..." His voice faded. But the sentence didn't need finishing. The silence that followed was unbearable. I wanted him to say something safe, something neutral, something that would put this moment back into a box where it belonged. But he didn't. He just watched me with that same unguarded concern, the same quiet intensity that had been growing since the night he walked into my room by accident. I forced myself to stand before I did something I couldn't undo. "I think I need a minute." He rose too, but kept his distance. His voice was low, rougher than before. "If I stay here, we're both going to make a mistake." I didn't disagree. I couldn't. He stepped back first, giving me the space I suddenly couldn't breathe without. "I'll go to the guest room," he said. "Just take care of yourself. Please." His plea hung in the air long after he walked away. When he disappeared down the hallway, I pressed a hand to my chest, trying to slow the pounding in my heart. It wasn't desire. It wasn't temptation. It was something far more dangerous: connection. The kind that grows in the cracks left behind by neglect. I sank back onto the couch, feeling the weight of what almost happened, feeling the gravity of everything we didn't do, everything we almost said. And for the first time, the question wasn't whether something could happen between us. It was how long we could keep pretending it hadn't already begun. The house felt strangely hollow after Daniel walked away, as if his absence weighed more than his presence ever did. I sat on the couch for a long time, breathing unevenly, trying to process everything that had nearly happened. My hands were still trembling, not from fear or guilt, but from the overwhelming truth of it all. Someone had finally seen me. Someone had finally cared. And that someone was not my husband. The realization stung more than anything else that I stayed in the living room long after the sun went down, staring at the quiet patterns of the dim lamp on the wall. It was safer to sit in the stillness than confront the whirlwind inside my chest. Safer to let the silence absorb my confusion than admit what I was feeling to be why the time my husband returned unexpectedly later that night. I had almost convinced myself I could forget the moment on the couch, forget the closeness, forget the way Daniel's voice had softened when he said he didn't trust himself to stay in the room with me. My husband walked through the door with the same distracted energy he always carried, tossing his keys onto the table without even looking in my direction. He didn't seem surprised I was awake. He didn't seem to notice the puffiness around my eyes or the tension in my posture. He just headed straight to the kitchen, complaining under his breath about work. "How was your trip?" I asked, knowing it wouldn't lead anywhere. "Long," he said. "Exhausting. And pointless. The whole thing could have been done over a call. But of course, they only listen if someone's physically there." He didn't ask how my day was. He didn't apologize for canceling our plans. He didn't sense anything at all. I watched him warm leftovers in the microwave. He didn't look up once. I felt something cold settle inside me, heavier than sadness, resentment. Resentment for all the times I had stood exactly where he was and waited for him to notice me. Resentment for how easily he had allowed me to become background noise in my own home. "Can we talk?" I said quietly. He paused only for a second before nodding, though the impatience was clear. "About what?" "About us." He glanced over, finally giving me a real look. "What about us?" I swallowed hard. This was the part one had been afraid of. But the moment with Daniel earlier had opened a door I couldn't close again. "You don't see me," I said. "Not really." He frowned. "What does that even mean?" "It means I'm lonely," I admitted. "It means I feel like I disappear whenever you're here. It means I don't feel like your wife anymore." He stared at me, confused, as if the idea had never occurred to him. "You know how much work I deal with. This isn't exactly the time for emotional breakdowns." The words hit like a slap. Emotional breakdowns. As if that's all this was to him. I exhaled shakily. "You weren't here when I needed you." "When?" His tone sharpened slightly. "What happened?" I hesitated. I wasn't going to mention Daniel, not what happened, not what almost happened. Not because I wanted to protect myself, but because nothing physical occurred and I refused to twist something emotional into something it wasn't. "I had a rough night," I said. "And I fell apart. And I realized I had no one to turn to." He sighed loudly, like the problem was me being dramatic, not him being absent. "You could have called." "I shouldn't have to fight for my husband's attention," I said. My voice cracked at the end despite my effort to stay controlled. He didn't soften. He didn't step closer. He didn't reach for me. Instead, he leaned back against the counter, arms crossed. "So you're upset because I'm busy?" "It's not the busy," I whispered. "It's the distance." He shook his head. "This is just stress talking. You'll feel better after some rest." The dismissal broke something in me. Something final. Something irreversible. "This isn't stress," I said quietly. "This is what happens when you stop noticing the person you married." For the first time, his expression faltered. Not from empathy, but from the realization that I wasn't letting it go. He straightened slightly, as if preparing for a fight he didn't want. "Are you saying you're unhappy?" "I'm saying I'm invisible," I replied. "And I'm tired of pretending that's okay." The silence that followed was suffocating. He didn't deny it. He didn't apologize. He didn't try to fix it. He just stared at me, defensive and confused, as if my pain was a language he never learned to understand. I walked to the hallway before he could argue further. My voice dropped to a quiet, trembling truth. "I shouldn't have to be seen by someone else before I'm seen by you." His face tightened. "Someone else?" I froze. The implication hung in the air. He stepped forward, suspicion flickering in his eyes. "What is that supposed to mean?" I steadied myself. "It means I needed you. And someone else noticed before you did. That's all." He opened his mouth to say something, but I didn't wait. I went upstairs. I couldn't handle his defensiveness, not when my heart was still raw and aching. I closed the bedroom door gently, not angrily, not dramatically. Just quietly. That quiet said more than anything else could. The next morning, Daniel was already awake, packing his things. He didn't look relieved to leave. He looked resolved, like someone who had spent the entire night thinking about boundaries and consequences and the fine line he never wanted to cross. "I think it's better if I head out a little early," he said. "I understand." He paused, studying my face. "Are you all right?" I nodded, though the weight in my chest said otherwise. He exhaled softly. "I'm sorry if I made anything harder for you." "You didn't," I said quickly. You were kind." That word seemed to affect him more than I expected. His expression softened, and for a moment something warm flickered between us. Something honest, something unspoken. He picked up his bag, hesitated at the doorway, then turned back. "You deserve to feel seen," he said quietly. "Don't forget that." It wasn't a confession. It wasn't a promise. It wasn't even a suggestion. It was a truth he wanted me to carry, not for him, but for myself. When he left, the house felt different. Not empty. Not lonely. Just realer. Like the walls finally echoed what I'd refused to admit for too long. Later that day, I sat alone at the kitchen table, hands clasped, breathing slowly. I didn't regret what didn't happen. I didn't regret what almost happened. I didn't regret the way my heart had reacted to kindness after years of neglect. What I regretted was letting myself drift so far from myself. The emotional closeness with Daniel had been a mirror. One that forced me to face everything missing in my marriage, everything I had ignored, everything I had tolerated. Rebuilding wouldn't be easy. Repairing wouldn't be quick. But for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid to confront the truth. And I wasn't willing to disappear again, not for anyone. Not even for the man I married.